This is an LA Times Studios podcast.
Hi, y'all. Popping in with a quick update before this episode. We will be talking about the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni lawsuits, but there was big news about it last week, so I wanted to talk about the updates. On June 9th, Baldoni's $400 million lawsuit was dismissed by Judge Louis Lyman. Baldoni's suit was filed against Blake Lively, her husband Ryan Reynolds, Lively's publicist, and the New York Times. Basically, Judge Lyman said that Baldoni had failed to provide enough evidence to prove any of his claims. And we'll get into the details of those claims in this episode. But the ruling was a big blow for the Baldoni case. Even still, things are not ending anytime soon. Blake Lively's lawsuit against Baldoni is still moving forward. Meanwhile, Baldoni's legal team says they are amending some of the issues that Judge Lyman called into question in order to appeal the case against Lively. All in all, we'll just have to see what continues to unfold between these two. This episode provides a lot of context into what both parties are arguing and gives a fuller picture of this case beyond what you see on social media. So anyways, enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to LA Crimes. I'm your host, Madison McGhee. Today, I am joined by the host of two incredible true crime podcasts, Unraveled and The First Degree, Alexis Linkletter. Alexis, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
On this episode, we're going to be diving into the dirty details of the Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively lawsuit. But before we get too far into it, I want to hear more about your journey, Alexis, into the world of true crime. You host two very wonderful but very different true crime shows. So tell me a little bit about those.
Yeah, so the monthly show I host is called Unraveled, and that's a show I do with Investigation Discovery. And basically, we cover all of the ins and outs of the Long Island serial killer investigation in the trial that's currently unfolding with suspect Rex Heuermann. And even today, there was a breakthrough in the case with the identification of a victim who had previously gone unidentified since 1997. So just all the details as they come out. And my other show is a weekly true crime podcast that I host with my best friend, Jack Vanek. And we put out 3 episodes per week. And one is called The Deep Dive, where we delve into just very topical subjects, including Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni and the really scandalous lawsuit that's been unfolding between them. So that's something she and I have been all over in terms of our coverage, and we just can't get enough of it. And I think everybody sort of feels the same way.
I do feel like there's like this common thread of like a personal story that gets everyone sort of involved in true crime, or the reason that they start diving into a case or start a podcast or something like that. Obviously, I have such a personal connection. But you also have a very personal story. And so this first segment I always like to do with guests is called The Gateway Case, to talk about what really got them in to true crime. Can you tell me a little bit about yours?
Sure. So I'm from Long Island, and I actually went to school with somebody who essentially broke the story of corruption within the Long Island serial killer case open. And that occurred all the way back in 2012. So it was really that year that I became completely immersed with that case. And at the time, it was still very much unsolved. It had only been a couple of years since they started finding the victims along Ocean Parkway on Long Island. And I just have been obsessed with it ever since. And once I dove into that one is when I realized just how good I was at exploring various cases, unsolved and solved, which is how The First Degree kind of came to be as well. So, this is what I do all day, every day.
So tell me a little bit more about that.
So a big part of the Long Island serial killer case was that the investigation was thwarted by a corrupt police official named James Burke. And his misdeeds were exposed after a heroin addict broke into his car and stole a duffel bag out of it. And in the bag, there were sex toys and ammunition and all sorts of strange things. After that burglary of his vehicle, this police chief went to the suspect's house and dragged him out and brought him to the police department and basically beat and tortured him for hours. Now, the man this happened to, his name is Christopher Loeb, and he's someone I had gone to middle school and high school with. So after he went to jail for burglarizing the police chief's car. And after he was beaten by him, we reconnected and he started telling me his story. And it was really Chris who knocked the police chief out of power. And it was this very interesting David and Goliath story because the police chief had been doing all sorts of illegal activities for decades. But it took this one guy, having his civil rights violated and having a lawyer take his complaint seriously to dethrone the most powerful police figure in the county at the time. And also he was the one who essentially destroyed the investigation into the Long Island serial killer case and is the reason why it wasn't solved sooner.
It's really interesting. We talk about this a lot on this show, and just I think it's a general thing now that everyone is aware of. Unless someone is willing to help you talk about what happened to you, no one really does anything. There's this court of public opinion that is really driving our justice system. And this is such a great example of that. I mean, someone who's getting away with something for so long until someone who's young enough, connected enough, gets the right person involved to say, hey, this isn't right. Now it's public enough that someone does something. Because I'm sure that even with higher ups knowing this was going on, if they're getting away with it and no one knows and it's getting brushed under the rug, they're going to keep doing it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that is what we'll get into a little bit more this episode, but also just in general in true crime, it takes this level of connecting with a journalist, connecting with a podcaster, hey, share my story, before police departments around the country are activated or held accountable, which is really sad and scary.
It's sad and scary, but at the same time, it is liberating knowing there is at least one option for recourse if the police aren't helping you. Media pressure is pressure.
100%. And so much has happened in your own career since that. I mean, to go from a moment of sort of curiosity to the career that you've built for yourself is really impressive. Even with Unraveled, I mean, now you're sort of a spokesperson for this case, which is really incredible, and these victims, but also with the first degree, you're talking directly with people who were connected to these cases. What inspired you to take that unique approach in true crime versus sort of the traditional, we're just going to recap every week a new case, maybe a hot topic case? I think what you're doing is really unique and needed in the genre.
It's interesting to realize how everybody does have a connection to violent crime, unfortunately. It shows how prevalent it is, how much of a problem it is. And also, when you're exploring the details of a case, somebody could have a unique connection. So you're opening that up from a completely different perspective than normal. Usually, in a traditional telling of a true crime story, you're hearing it from the police perspective, an investigative perspective, typically. And the first degree, at least, really gives you an opportunity to see how these cases impact people in every facet of life, really, from the lawyers who defend serial killers and what that looks like for them and the emotional implications, to people who witness executions. I mean, really, the list goes on in terms of the ways people are moved by the very intense and visceral feelings that are derived from these tragedies.
Yeah, it's really special, the work that you're doing, and to help people sort of share their own story and perspective, but also connect with an audience. I always say this, more people are connected to unsolved crime than they are solved crime. And so to be able to talk with people who maybe have experienced a unique sense of closure, whether that's not necessarily through a closed case, but understanding what that can look like for other people and letting people share their own perspective in what that looks like, and the emotional turmoil that exists for people related to crime that aren't directly victims that's most common because most of us are adjacently connected to these stories. So I think it's really special.
Thanks, Madison.
Alexis and I will be back in just a moment, but first, a quick break. You know when a shirt just becomes your go-to? That's what happened when I picked up a few new pieces from Quince. They're the first things I reach for in my closet. Lightweight, comfortable, and always on point. Quince has all the things you actually want to wear, like organic cotton silk polos, European linen beach shorts, and comfortable pants that work for everything from backyard hangs to nice dinners. The best part? Everything with Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than what you'd find at similar brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middlemen, Quince gives you luxury pieces without the crazy markups. Elevate your closet with Quince. Go to quince.com/LAcrimes for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/LAcrimes to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/LAcrimes. Welcome back to LA Crimes. I'm joined today by true crime podcaster, investigative journalist, and just incredible person, Alexis Linkletter. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So I don't know about you, but I have been pretty obsessed with this lawsuit, counter lawsuit situation going on between Justin and Blake since it started last year. What are your thoughts about what's going on? And can you kind of recap what has happened up to this point?
Yes, I have thoughts. So to recap, in the very simplest terms, the drama really began, at least publicly, around New Year's of 2024, which is when Blake filed her civil lawsuit against Justin Baldoni and when the New York Times released their piece about Justin Baldoni. And in that piece was a really key piece of evidence in the lawsuit, and those were text messages that Blake Lively's team had acquired through kind of unknown sources. At the time, they said they had received them through a subpoena, but there were questions about that. But ever since that piece came out, that New York Times piece, it's been back and forth. Baldoni filed a counter lawsuit against the New York Times, against Blake Lively and her husband, Ryan Reynolds. And his lawsuit contained some really jaw-dropping evidence. And I think people are so invested in this because it's the first time we're really getting a peek behind the curtain of like a Hollywood machine and the disruption of it. Yeah, it's really astonishing. And people are really paying attention because people like Taylor Swift are being dragged into this by Blake Lively, who, based on text messages we've seen, seemed to use her name as muscle to get what she wanted with Justin Baldoni. So it's just a really interesting back and forth that we've never seen anything like before.
Has your opinion changed as you've heard more? I think a common theme amongst the journalists I've been talking to is that the more you know about a case, the more of an opinion you really form. And what you think from a top line the first time you read something to months and months later after you've been studying it and really learning about it, your opinion kind of evolves and changes because there's so much new information. Has that happened to you in this case?
Yes, because I have read every shred of documentation in the order it's been released. And the first thing I read was Blake Lively's complaint. And I read it page to page, and I was like, okay. You know, in her anecdotes that she shared about what she experienced on set, I was like, well, if that really happened, that's horrible, you know? And then I read the New York Times piece and I was like, this looks really bad. This is just another example of a man, you know, behaving badly on a set and acting inappropriately on a set. You know, I wasn't surprised. And as a woman, my instinct is to just believe women, always. So, yeah, at first, that's how I felt. Then I read Justin Baldoni's lawsuit, and his evidence appears more compelling. And it's important to note that we are in the lawsuit phase. There could be fake things in these lawsuits. You know, I don't believe there are. I think Justin Baldoni's really buttoned up with his countersuit. The more we learn about Blake Lively, though, the more flimsy her evidence appears. You know, the most recent development, we talked about that subpoena briefly, about those text messages that Blake Lively's publicist, Leslie Sloan, acquired somehow. And these were correspondences between Justin Baldoni and his publicist, Stephanie Jones. How did they get those? And they did it, people believe, after Stephanie Jones gave Leslie Sloan the text messages to cover their ass to pretend they got them legally. So that's really unethical, if true, right? So when you do things like that, it really muddies people's ability to believe you if you're not straightforward.
And what, from a technicality standpoint, I mean, these are civil suits. These are not criminal charges, especially when it comes to like a sexual assault situation. Because it was in New York, if New York prosecutors really wanted to file charges against him for criminally, they would. They haven't. What are the implications here if someone wins or loses? It's money, it's pride. What's the end goal with these lawsuits?
I think there's no criminal element because sexual harassment is so nuanced, and there really isn't a criminal basis for it. So I think it'll probably stay in the civil family, but who knows?
This case is so divisive online. Even within the algorithm, you're either pro Blake Lively or you're pro Justin Baldoni, and what you're fed because of that, I think, is shifting. But then you have people who are sort of these amateur investigators who are uncovering things. So it's this very weird fine line of like, how do we navigate that? And with the work you're doing, how do you sift through all of this? I mean, you read all the legal documents, but there's got to be some element of scrolling through and seeing people's recaps and watching them and absorbing that information. How do you find those lines?
So I think it's really important because of what we talked about just moments ago about the power of media. I think it's amazing that people are developing a greater sense of media literacy and realizing that even people on TikTok who are doing this amazing work and uncovering very pivotal pieces of evidence, then there are bots, there are bots controlling algorithms that, somebody named in Blake Lively's lawsuit is basically one of these people who you hire for crisis PR who helps manipulate social media narratives. So I think it's just really important to take everything with a grain of salt and try to just stick to the documents. And even then, having the awareness and ability to still step back and not die on any hill until it goes to trial, But because of the power of media, like we talked about, Blake, Ryan, Justin, they're all trying to use it to their advantage. And so are all the powers that be, right? If the media is so powerful, they're trying to use it. Everybody is. Only in the last couple of years are people seeing that we can't believe everything, that there's an angle, even in unbiased reporting. Humans have inherent biases, the questions they ask, the opinions they form, even when they're just reporting in an unbiased, quote unquote, objective fashion. We have to just be our own filters and have healthy skepticism with everything.
So let's say you're Alexis in January. I'm assuming it was the 1st of January that all of this stuff really, really dropped of this year. You're reading this, just Blake's complaint.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? What's happening in this as you're building sort of a timeline in your own mind?
Right. So I couldn't believe what I was reading when I dug into Blake's complaint because so many of her experiences on set seemed so incredibly inappropriate. I mean, in her complaint, she talked about body shaming, about inappropriate comments that were made about her weight. She talked about how she was trying to breastfeed and her privacy was being interrupted by Justin Baldoni entering her trailer. She talked about scenes that she shot, one in particular in It Ends With Us was a birthing scene. She talked about how, she alleged that Justin Baldoni hired his friend to act in that scene as the doctor, and that she was basically nude on set and that the set was not closed to the extended crew and how uncomfortable that made her. Really, the list goes on and on. There was a lot of allegations sprinkled throughout with limited context, but what context you could glean from what she said and alleged in this complaint, it appeared very bad for Justin Baldoni. And my instinct, obviously, my knee-jerk is to side with this woman who was made to feel deeply uncomfortable. I mean, she had just had a child. Blake Lively's a big star. She wouldn't possibly say this if it wasn't true, right? So that's how I felt. I felt like she had been wronged initially with her lawsuit alone.
And so then the New York Times piece drops, which was based on her complaint. I mean, there was no other legal lawsuit complaint filed at this point. And that further solidified her position as the victim in this case. And what did that do when you read that in your mind?
The New York Times piece was fascinating. It really upped the ante in a lot of ways because suddenly, in addition to everything Blake alleged in her lawsuit, this really demonstrated this alleged smear campaign. We saw all of these alleged texts between Justin and his publicist talking about pieces in the Daily Mail, various pieces of press that appeared to have been created or at least facilitated by Justin's PR team. And it appeared as though he and his team had retaliated against Blake Lively for essentially whistleblowing about her negative experience in making these sexual harassment allegations.
And then almost immediately, we have this countersuit where Justin Baldoni then sues the New York Times first for defamation. And that's when I think the internet really exploded because now we're hearing sort of this silent other side of the story that we hadn't heard before. And what was his countersuit exactly?
His countersuit was shocking. His countersuit, basically, to paraphrase, claimed that everything Blake alleged was a lie, in that she was making these allegations not in retaliation for sexual harassment, but because she wanted to hijack this movie, and that she did essentially succeed at that. So he added context to everything. It really, really broke this whole story open. Blake was angry about all of the bad press she was getting on the heels of It Ends With Us. People thought she was tone deaf, that she was using a movie about domestic violence to promote her hair care, to promote her liquor line, to promote her husband's gin company. They didn't believe that she was taking it seriously. And Blake believed that this negative press couldn't possibly be because of her own actions. So she alleged it was all Justin Baldoni. And in Justin's lawsuit, he provided evidence that that's not true, that he hired Crisis PR because of what was happening, because of the feud, but they didn't actually have to do anything because it was sort of happening organically. That's the word they kept using. No, this was happening organically. In his lawsuit, he includes text messages where Blake uses Taylor Swift to try to strong-arm him, to get Justin to implement her ideas, and basically says in so many words and in so many document pages that she's trying to ruin his career because he wouldn't let her take over the movie completely and because the press following the movie was bad, and she thinks that's Justin's fault.
After the break, we'll talk about where this court case stands now and what to expect, and play a little devil's advocate, even though the devil really doesn't need any more advocates. And we don't even really know who the devil is in this situation. Welcome back to LA Crimes. Alexis, I gotta know, where do you stand on this case?
I think Justin Baldoni's evidence is more compelling. I need tangible proof, and there has been no trial yet. But Justin Baldoni's evidence is more compelling. And given what we've learned about this shell company, Van Zandt, which was used to issue a subpoena way before this case began, and the ethical implications, that undermines Blake's evidence more, in my opinion. So based on the evidence, I think Justin Baldoni has a much stronger case.
And how many times do you think your opinion has changed since beginning to look into this?
Just once.
Interesting.
As soon as Justin's lawsuit came out, my opinion was changed because it was a more complete, honest representation of what happened. Full emails, full text threads. They released footage of a scene that Blake alleged Justin acted inappropriately in, and that is not what I saw. And she was also acting like the director when he's the director. You know, I don't think the video footage that they released did what Blake hoped it would do.
And then the one person we really haven't discussed is Colleen Hoover, who wrote the book and is a very famous author and famously written many, many, many New York Times bestselling books. And I think part of the reason that this garnered so much attention is because her books are so wildly popular. People were very excited that this was becoming a movie. And it really got washed by a lot of this bad press. Mm-hmm. What does she have to say about this? Because in my mind, this is very important to her because it's her book becoming a movie. This is a really big deal. And now no one's talking about the actual movie. I wonder how many people who are involved in this discourse online have even seen the film and are just talking about this lawsuit. What does she say about all of this?
So her evolution in her position has been really interesting. So she had a long-standing rapport with Justin Baldoni. And when he acquired the rights to make the It Ends With Us movie, apparently it was Colleen Hoover who asked Justin to play the support, the other lead role in the film. And they had a very good dynamic. He's included emails between them in his lawsuit as well. Although once there was tension on set, it appeared that Colleen took Blake Lively's side. And after the movie came out, Colleen and Blake appeared at several events together, including, I think it was called BookCon, and they were very chummy. However, and then after the lawsuit broke, Colleen made a post on Instagram essentially voicing her support for Blake Lively. But then when Justin filed his countersuit and public opinion shifted, Colleen essentially dropped off the radar, deleted all of her pictures with Blake off her Instagram.
What is even considered a win at this point? I mean, do you think Blake Lively will ever fully recover from this? Will people be afraid to work with her on set in fear of sort of another situation like this? Like, do you think even if she wins from a legal perspective or settles or tries to sort of brush this under the rug, what is a win for her from a career perspective?
I think her career will suffer greatly. I don't know if it will recover. Do I think that's fair? No, because men have done so much worse and they get second, third, fourth, fifth chances. So many A-listers have had very public downfalls, beaten women, done way worse things, and have had massive comebacks. Women aren't granted that same opportunity, unfortunately. So do I think it's fair that her career is destroyed? No, not in that, not when you make those comparisons. Should it be? Maybe. I don't know. What we're seeing, if true, is really bad and an exploitation of her position, her power, her husband's power. I don't know. I don't know what's fair. I just know that men get away with worse.
For sure. For sure. No, this has been amazing.
Oh, great.
And such an incredible, thoughtful deep dive into this. I know you are very well-versed and well-studied on this. So thank you so much for taking the time and joining me today.
It is my pleasure. I am fascinated by this. It's a peek behind a curtain none of us ever thought we'd see,
Well, Alexis Linkletter, thank you so much for joining me. And if you want to listen to Alexis on any of her shows, you can check out Unraveled or The First Degree wherever you get your podcasts. And that's it for LA Crimes. I'm Madison McGhee. Please rate and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to LA Crimes. If you'd like to hear more, please purchase a subscription to the LA Times podcast feed. You'll unlock weekly bonus episodes, and you'll be supporting the award-winning journalists of the LA Times. It's the best way to support the show.